Time for our daily rising crisis update. We'll start where we always do with the numbers, and we've added a few to the mix for you all to be able to see. But let's go ahead and start with where we are in the United States. You can see we've got 463,000 cases. That's an increase of 34,000 roughly since yesterday. 16,695 deaths. That's an increase of almost 2,000 deaths worldwide. You can see we added 0.1 million cases to a total of 1.5 million. 96,000 deaths, added about 7,000 deaths. And as always, remember, take these with a grain of salt. They're much less than precise even here in the United States due to the limits of testing and also some lag time in terms of how the reporting occurs. We have some additional numbers for you, though, too. You can see newly reported deaths today, 1,900 versus yesterday, 1,800. So that death toll continuing to rise, albeit relatively slowly. We also see the newly reported cases still continuing to rise, albeit comparatively slowly. Today, 34,000 new versus yesterday, 30,000. A week ago, we were adding 28,000 new cases a day. Let's take a look also at some information regarding tests. We, of course, know that the testing, ability to get a test and how widespread the tests are is really critical in terms of being able to get back to normal, to identify who has the virus, who doesn't, and be able to move forward. So today, we were able to get 163,000 newly reported tests. That's an increase from yesterday. It's also an increase from where we were last week. Not as much progress, of course, always as we'd like to see, but some progress being made there. And you can see the share of tests that are coming back positive relatively stable, which is also interesting. Another thing that we're learning here is that the models are predicting, Saagar, that the peak in terms of number of deaths is supposed to occur this weekend. So there's some hope that we may be getting to the worst of this crisis and be able to move forward before then. Another good piece of news is it looks like they're going to have antibody tests available perhaps as early as next week. Why does that matter? Well, if you can test people who have had the virus to see if they have those antibodies in their system, that may be an indication that they are themselves immune,
right,
which means they could go out and do some of this community work and be allowed sort of back into the population to be able to start again to get things back to normal.
There's a lot to digest there. I think the most important thing there was that, yes, the deaths are going up, the tests are going up, the cases are going up, but it's not going up as linearly. And as you said, the peak
as exponentially.
As exponentially. Now, but the one problem we have is that the one thing that remained linear in its rise was the testing. Is that last week compared to this week, the amount of tests that we're conducting are not at the level where they need to be. We need to increase the antibody testing and the current testing scheme and have that capacity for one reason, which is that is the only way that we get out of this. And remember, just because we're at the peak doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. That doesn't mean things are going to be gone tomorrow. And as we see in Singapore and in Taiwan, which is two countries Singapore and Japan, that had two countries that were doing relatively well in the beginning, second wave began because they opened up social life a little bit quickly. So there's a general phasing of which life is going to have to go through. So that means that the most important thing, therapeutics, testing, contract tracing, all eventually gets us to the point where we can have a vaccine. That's what we have to focus on.
Right. Also important to note that although the national numbers may peak this weekend, there's going to be a lot of variation region to region. Right. So some places are going to be, at their peak now. Some places are going to peak later on. We're going to see new hotspots continue to emerge, including, as we covered here yesterday, potentially in Washington, D.C. So a lot still to keep our eyes on.
And so interesting news, as we've covered here, this is much more related to the crisis. There's a currently new poll by the New York Post. It shows that Democrats want to drop Joe Biden for Andrew Cuomo. And this new poll has found, with a national poll saying 56% of Democrats prefer Cuomo, 44% wanting to stick with Biden. That's a 12-point margin outside of the 4.8% margin of error.
Quite a vote of confidence
there.
Pretty
brutal poll there. This has been shared with the New York Post. I mean, it just demonstrates of what we've talked about that competence gap, about so much in related to this. And yet the mystifying thing, as we covered on the show, is that the only reason Cuomo is famous as a result of this is A, he didn't do a very good job containing it in the beginning, so now he's getting the media narrative that he's taking hold of a crisis which is much of his own making.
Yeah.
And B, because the media is all based out of New York and New York City
Right.
in particular, and so that's who they're going to for their information.
Cuomo's, I mean, look, we've laid out the reality of his approach here, but he's gotten so many style points from the media that his approval rating overall for his crisis handling is unbelievably high. Meanwhile, the polling that we've seen in terms of Biden versus Trump on who people would prefer to handle the crisis, it's been very close. One had Trump up, one had Biden up, but it's sort of neck and neck.
Yeah.
But apparently if Democrats had a choice, they're already having, I mean, the guy just secured the nomination this week, and they're already having buyer's remorse of like, well, maybe this other guy over here might be a better choice.
Pretty funny. So
Not a great vote of confidence there. Thank you all for watching. We'll have more for you next week.